Hi, I'm Laurel.
I'm Colin,
I'm Wolf.
And I'm Chelsea.
and we're the Gamesmiths. We just got done playing Die by the Sword. So I want to give you some of our feedback from the game.
Yeah, I think we all had a really good time with it. I think you saw that. Wrapped up right about an hour. I feel it was a good time. I don't feel like it drug on too long, especially because the closer you got to the end, like the faster things started happening.
Yeah, I really accelerated quickly. So I'm happy that I skipped drawing a line once because like having a defensive strategy is kind of good, and then like everyone had so many cards at the end of the game that it was like, okay, so what can we do at this point?
Yeah.
And then you kind of figure out there's only there's kind of diminishing returns on the cards, so like having so many doesn't really benefit you that much.
Yeah.
So that was kind of interesting to learn, because possibly earlier on in the rounds I might have been playing my cards had I known that like, oh, this really doesn't benefit you unless you have like a couple of the combos that can get you like maybe 4 lines of one turn. Like I potentially could have if there were spaces open at the end of the game with the chameleon card and 2 of the hippos out. I was like, that could have been awesome.
Yeah.
So it's fun the different ways your hands switched and changed. I would maybe go over like order of operation with like revealing cards. So like what happens first? Maybe even get like a color order to like blue is first, red is second, black is third, and then red is fourth. Is when you reveal the cards as to what resolves before the other one does.
Yeah, I think that.
So because we were a little confused onto like, okay, so when do we do this? When we figured that out, that was one thing that could be kind of be clarified. But like I enjoyed the game. It was really fun. I like the animals, and like we just enjoyed bantering about like what they were doing.
Yeah. Yeah, the
just the
aesthetics
theme
of
was really fun.
The aesthetics of the game were really great. And yeah, I mean, I think like I don't have a lot of criticisms of the game. We definitely talked about how the scorecard should maybe be enlarged. Is that a word?
I'd add more detail. Just use the whole page. Because you're saying laminated.
And make it laminated, or you could give each person their own scorecard. That's like the size that you want it to be.
But if you're already going,
so you can reuse it over.
Yeah, if you're already going with the laminated and the whiteboard marker, you might as well just make the
so you can reuse the score sheet over and over. That'll save you some money.
And then if you're going to do that, might as well use the whole page. And I would go with making more like how Yahtzee does, with just the very like, there's just not quite enough room to do all the math that you need to do to figure out everybody's score on the, especially if you're using a dry erase marker that you kind of got right bigger in. So I would just use these same kind of big cells, but make one for each blue rank, number of cells, kind of thing like that, points per cell, just so you can do the math a little bit easier. But that would probably be the biggest like criticism of this, is this quite wasn't the room I needed to do the math to figure this out. I made it work, but had to write tiny.
But overall,
game board's perfect.
Yeah, I had
perfect
a lot
size.
Of fun
You can maybe even
it.
make that a little bigger too if you wanted to, but not necessarily. I think it's fine the way it is. I think it's great.
I mean, it would help because it's kind of hard sometimes to draw the lines when you're like reaching, and the dry erase markers aren't always like,
Yeah.
But one thing I was gonna say, going off of what Colin had said about kind of learning the strategy of how to use your cards and stuff, I feel like this game would get even more fun like the more that you understood what each card does, and having different strategies. Like I could see so many different ways that you could try to play this. Like I was kind of just, since it was a new game, just kind of like,
Figuring
try
it out,
this. Yeah. But one of the strategies that I did have was like these 5 spaces. If there was 2, I wouldn't go ahead and draw the third one because I didn't want somebody else on their next turn before I get to go again to be able to take that. So I would wait for other people to
Or
do
if you're
that.
going last,
yeah.
then you have a
That's
chance to go twice to like really close it off.
I really liked that mechanic.
Going last then first.
Yeah.
And the different turns.
Because a lot of games, you'll go last and then you'll go third and then you'll go, if it does have a moving one, it goes around with the turn order. So I did really like that mechanic.
Yeah.
And I I liked the strategy of like going last and being like, all right, what can I set myself up for next time?
Right,
Yeah.
looking at your cards because you're like, I'm rolling
Yeah.
the dice. So yeah. I definitely I was doing that too.
Yeah.
Not obviously not as effectively. But.
The other thing that we needed a little bit of clarification was just one of the cards, which was
The alligator.
Alligator rotating.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
rotating,
Yeah.
whether it's just to the next space or if it's to the next space that hasn't already been.
And then what happens
Clear.
to the card? Does somebody take the card? Does it not go to anybody?
Yeah.
So are
Yeah.
you at disadvantage? So there's just some questions as far as in the shuffling.
Mhm.
So we mentioned a lot of that during
Yeah, and when
actual
you hit-
gameplay.
That's something I always recommend is if you have a deck of cards in your game, tell people what happens when the deck runs out. Because people will reshuffle if they're not supposed to, or they won't when they are. And they'll always wonder what happens when we run out of cards. Like that's a question, as someone who's explained the rules to a million games, that's a question I always get asked. What happens when we run out of cards?
Yeah.
I don't know. So yeah, I had a lot of fun with this too. I was excited. This is obviously like a more developed version of a game I would play with my brothers on road trips where we draw a bunch of dots on graph paper and we just connect the lines. You just go one at a time, and it's just kind of like a slightly,
More
it's this. Yeah, it's
advanced,
like slightly
yeah.
more advanced tic-tac-toe.
It's like that mixed with Carcassonne, kind of.
Yeah, yeah, and so
Yeah.
this was a lot of fun with the added strategy and the randomization to it and everything like that. So I like the depth that you added to kind of this like classic game, which I always enjoy when people are like, oh yeah, it's like, yeah,
Hits the nostalgia.
it does. Well, and it's also
And-
just like the foundation for really good game design. Like if you can boil your game down to just the core mechanic of just drawing lines on the dots and it's still fun, it's good. It's why Pokemon is paper rock scissors just with cute animals. And
You've got the cute
yeah,
animals.
and so you got the cute. Yeah, so this is the Pokemon formula. It's cute animals, and solid core gameplay.
Yeah,
So,
and there's going to be pros and
yeah.
cons to having a dry erase marker too, because you could also go a different way where you possibly did like pegs and like rubber bands connecting, or like little straws or something. I'm just thinking like
If you wanna make
development
it
wise. So
tactile.
like I don't know if you want like multiple markers, if you want to laminate the score marker, but that's another way that you could do this because they could possibly make it cheaper. Have like certain colors or just like certain like walls for this, so you wouldn't necessarily have like, oh shoot, what happened to the pen? Oh, I don't know. So that's something if you want to develop this a little further. But this, this worked great. So that's
Yeah.
just another option.
But
I do think it has a lot of replayability
For
just
sure.
because of all the different strategies, and I could easily see like expansions coming out where it's like a different set of cards and like there's certain factions or
Add another
different
color to make it
theme.
5, so you could have
Yeah.
5 players, or like you could add
you could have
other
like a two-sided board that had flip it over and maybe the starting lines are drawn differently, so you get a
Yeah.
different game. But
Absolutely.
yeah, I think you have.
Yeah.
I think you definitely have a very.
And
solid
that's where
game.
like the pegging could really work into your favor, since you have these pre-drawn lines already, so you could have those switch all the time and be like, okay, so at the beginning of the game you draw X amount of cards, like each player gets to draw a line where they would like. So
draw
that could
the
be
starting
like
lines.
yeah, that could be something interesting and
yeah.
fun.
But either way, I think we all think you have a really solid game here. We all had a lot of fun. Maybe look at just refining tying up any of the loose end rules there, or anything that you saw we played wrong that you didn't like, or we thought that didn't make sense. Kind of consider making that a little more clear to your players. But other than that, you got a really solid game here. It's a lot of fun with a lot of cool potential and a fun art style. So thanks, and keep up the good work.